Hi, I fear I'm very much the opposite of Stuart. He was obviously giving you the how to get ahead in journalism. And I fear when you listen to me, you'll hear the how not to get ahead in journalism or how to end up not even being a journalist. It's a sort of old school thing that I go back for about 30 years being a journalist. I just wish I'd heard Stuart 4 or 5 years ago before I set up the rather short-lived Dad46 blog, because he obviously knew what he was doing, whereas I ended up writing for Mumsnet for nothing. Because there was one thing Stuart did say, that none of his writers get paid, and I come from that golden age where we did get paid. So to be described as a Luddite, which is almost certainly true, dinosaur Luddite, the Luddites, of course, had something in their side. They were trying to get rid of a technology, the spinning looms, that was going to lead to less skilled, in their opinion, and lower paid people taking over their jobs. Having worked at The Observer for 20 years and been relatively well paid, and now my job is done by something The Guardian call a content provider. Anyhow, so how did I end up here? Obviously totally unqualified to help you in any other way than showing you what not to do. I met Nanya at a party. I was having a drunken rant about some of the things I will go on to mention. And she said, well, why don't you just repeat that? It's in the nature of drunken rants that you can't remember anything about them. So although that was helpful, it was only helpful to a limited extent. So I'm just going to pick 3 moments, one from the past, one from the present, and one maybe looking at the future, which demonstrate some of my concerns. And then if I can be of any help, I'm more than happy to take questions and anything I may or may not have learned along the way, perhaps particularly on, as I said, how not to do it. So I got into journalism. I was very lucky. I got in right in the late 80s. There were no men's magazines then. So I started writing for GQ right at the beginning. And it was a fairly typical sort of column about a single man living in a flat with a bottle of vodka and an onion in the fridge, which has been done and done and done, not least by me, for about the next 30 years. But it was, I was talking to Jason, an old colleague of mine who's now editor of The New Statesman. We're talking about the difference between why we went into journalism all those years ago and why the new generation, if you can call it that, old saying that, are going into journalism now. And it's very much for my group. It was, I think, we're very inspired by The New Journalist, by Tom Wolfe, by Hunter Thompson. None of us anywhere near as good as them. But that whole idea that as a journalist, you had this great opportunity to go out, to satisfy your curiosity. You were sent out for a week. I mean, there was money then, I suppose. So you'd be sent off with your photographer for a week to Alabama or whatever to watch NASCAR racing. And you weren't sent to go and come back with a particular story. The headline hadn't been written in advance. You would sit around and it would be, I wonder what that's really like. And this was, of course, great fun. I'm very privileged to be able to do it. But you were very much coming back and telling a story. And it was a very collaborative process. You had your photographer you were working with. When you got back, you had the graphic designer who'd set it out properly. You had your sub-editor. You had your editor. There'd be about 5 or 6 people who would read your copy before it was published. And that led to a certain rigor, because you knew that you had to make it good enough for all of them to let it pass. And also, if you made any mistakes or whatever, they could point it out. And I enjoy doing that. But it's very different now. And Jason was saying that the young guys, they don't want that, perhaps because there's not much opportunity for it or call for it. But it's far more important for them to build up their blog. To very much they want to be seen as opinion formers, to build up that Twitter following, to speed. As Stuart said, quite often speed's vital these days, first on. And I remember the sort of towards the end of my time at The Guardian being rung up. And this guy said, I've sent you an email, why haven't you responded? I said, because I'm out walking the dogs. And this confused him on so many levels. One, that anyone outside the M25 was still working for The Guardian and walking dogs. And 2, walking. And he said, why are you walking? I said, well, I'm trying to think about what I might write. And that also confused him, because one of my worries with this, the speed, the emphasis on speed, by definition leads to thoughtlessness. You cannot think sufficiently to write something of interest which someone else might have an interest in reading if you're just splurging it out. I remember at the Beijing Olympics, Usain Bolt, The Guardian needed 1,000 words within 2 seconds of the race ending. Well, you can do it, but it's not very interesting because most of it's been written before the race has been run. It has to be. So this endless content, at the moment, there seems to be the big battle is for speed. Let's get it on there first. Let's be the first to break that news. This, of course, leads to lots of mistakes because people don't check things, but they're not so. But it also leads to a lack of thought, and I don't know whether I want to read thoughtless rants. I'm not sure. It also leads a lot of noise, but it just. That form of journalism, which was storytelling, is at the moment has a back seat. I hope that there will be some way that long-form journalism, people get tired of just being bombarded by this noise and these tweets and these sort of opinions. So the guy, Andrew Sparrow, who writes, he does brilliantly on The Guardian, he does that political thing, but he must put out about 25,000 words a day. It's just on and on and on. And if you just want information undiluted, fine, but if instead you're looking for something that someone maybe talked to a few more people, gone out and met the people, so got their own opinion of them, rather than just taking their blog at face value, doing this, doing that. I'm not sure where you go for that. Second meeting was with Alan Rusbridger, who I would, of course, consider the villain of the piece, insofar as the job I used to do has become sort of redundant under his watch. I remember The Guardian had one of their parties at Fabric, which was sort of a very trendy nightclub, which The Observer... There was always a big split between The Observer and The Guardian. The Observer, of course, were Sunday paper, so we had a lot more time to write our stories. The pressure on us was always to find something that no one else had written about during the week that was valid on a Sunday. The Guardian were daily paper and far more on message. The Guardian's far more of a brand, and you would never be allowed to criticise another writer in The Guardian from another bit of the paper, whereas The Observer, it was almost compulsory that your piece should attack someone else who's a page on, and the whole sort of... Anyhow, there's this... The Guardian have their Christmas party at Fabric, and it doesn't even start till 10 o'clock in the evening, by which time most Observer journalists are pretty gone, because they've started at lunchtime. They don't understand the idea of a party starting at 10 in the evening. But I did manage to see Mr. Rusbridger get past all the goons in front of him. I did say to him, Alan, you keep writing about how you want to play the piano. That's what your love of your life is, playing the piano. Why not rid yourself of all these people and just go and play the piano? Now, sadly, he didn't take my advice, although he did go on playing the piano and doing both jobs, and paying himself enough to pay for that piano. But Rusbridger's... I think the mistake he made, and no one's... is that he thought if we get enough people, if we get enough followers, if it doesn't matter, we will monetize it later. I can't think of another business where you think, we'll do this, and then we'll think how we'll make money out of it. He didn't ever think, let's do this because it will make money. Let's do this, and then I'm sure we'll make money. And of course, what happened then was he gave it away for free. So what you've been doing as a job suddenly had... the two trades that suffered most from the internet were journalists and pornographers, both of whom, but porn stars and writers, amateurs were doing it, everyone was doing it for nothing, so why pay for someone else? And it's true. It's very hard as a journalist to then say that your piece is worth £10 or whatever when someone else is doing it for nothing. And the same in the porn business. And what Rusbridger sort of, by doing that, I think he sort of undermined the whole business model. It's very hard now that papers like the Times and Telegraph are going behind a paywall to try and generate some revenues. It's going to be very hard for them, once you've given it away for free, it's very hard to charge people because the mentality is it should be free. And although the argument from The Guardian is, well, the BBC is for free and we've got to attack the BBC, that is correct. But the BBC also has an inherent weakness in that it has to be impartial, otherwise it loses its whole brand focus. And it cannot focus on entertainment either, because that's not the model that it's doing. So there's room to do something that is fun and entertaining and deeply partial, and I think charge for it. But so far... he hasn't done that, and the big problem he then suffered, and Stuart mentioned how his advertisers were at the core of the business. Now, it was advertisers that paid for all those fun trips I went on. It's advertisers paying Stuart now, because in the sort of 70s, 80s and 90s was the golden period of newspapers. Before that, they hadn't really made any money. And although journalists like to kid themselves that the important thing is their opinion and their lovely writing, we were just the sort of porridge in between the adverts. Newspapers were set up to sell adverts. It was Rover paying £40,000 or whatever or more to have a full-page advert that kept the Guardian and the Observer being able to pay journalists. This all was sort of, this con continued because for Rover it looked quite nice having the full-page advert in their head office, and they believed they were getting value for money for it. As soon as the internet came along and the newspapers tried to deflect the advertisers towards these new models, to the website rather than the newspaper, there was a problem for the guy at Rover because he quite liked his full-page advert in a Telegraph to the Guardian or whatever. That was a status symbol, whereas a poxy little bit of Rover signage on this new thing that he didn't know anything about, he wasn't sure about at all, and he didn't know it would work. And the Guardian then said, okay, but well, you only have to pay 10%. And he went, okay, I might do that, but he didn't really do it. And then they, of course, came back and said, by the way, can you still advertise in the newspaper? And he'd go, but you told me that newspapers were dead and I had to advertise here. And almost at a stroke, the con had been the scene for the con that it was. That they were being charged double for their adverts than they really needed to. And this process of this becomes self-fulfilling and goes downwards. I'm very glad to hear Stuart say that, that Twitter may not be quite as successful as he thinks it is, because perhaps as a sign of my Luddite dinosaur position, I can't quite understand. Twitter, it seems to be yet more. It's more noise. All the noise. There's Nate Silver's book, The Signal of Noise, and he's the guy who's very good at predicting things. He's got that blog. I think he's gone from the New York Times to ESPN, but he predicted the last 2 American elections, almost every state, right? And it does seem at the moment there's this endless noise, and that Twitter, there's nothing more than more indicative of this than the tweet. And what is that? And everything condensed to 140 characters. And there are journalists and writers who've written 20,000 tweets, and that's 10 words a tweet. That's 200,000 words. That's 2 or 3 novels they could have written rather than tweeting away. And all these exorbitant claims have been made for it. That it's there was talk that of the Iranian Revolution that didn't happen 2 or 3 years ago was called the Twitter Revolution, wasn't it? And yet it then came, information came out that there were only 600 people in the whole of Iran who had Twitter. They were using Farsi rather than English, because you wouldn't tweet in English if you were a student in Iran trying to start a revolution. But no matter. Recently there've been this belief that Twitter was behind the Arab Spring, and that without it, it would never have happened, which Jonathan Franzen came up with a rather good point, that Eastern Europe managed to overthrow the communists without a 4G connection, which is astonishing when we think about it. So you can do things by actually going and talking to people, and you don't have to do it through Twitter. And the sort of Twitter nonsense, Paul Mason is a very good writer. Ex-Newsnight just moved to Channel 4 News, and there he was, I think the other night, saying, this is really exciting, Twitter has been launched, it's going to be the biggest launch since Facebook, and it's really exciting because Twitter have been given an exemption by, I can't remember, the Security Commission or whatever, that they don't have to show profits because they're such a big, exciting company, they'll be getting this on trust. And it seems so odd that Paul Mason, who spent 5 years slamming and castigating bankers for the silly loans they gave away, the fact that we could get mortgages by just telling people what we were going to earn, should now be praising them for Twitter being able to make promises. Oh, we will make money in the future because we must do, because we have so many followers. Well, it's like The Guardian. The numbers don't necessarily lead to the profits afterwards unless you can think of a way to monetize it. And I still don't know that a way has been found to monetize Twitter or indeed newspapers, other than, I suppose will happen, is selling our information to either companies or the state. But that's something we have to decide if we keep using them. coming near the end of my rant. So if there's anything that questions could come from it, and I'll just tell a story about Twitter and journalism, because it sort of shows, I mean, it might explain some of my bias against it as well. Just before, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was writing a piece for The Observer, and they wanted me to do a quick review of Test Match Special, on which Jonathan Agnew was interviewing Lily Allen. And I didn't know that Lily Allen and him had been tweeting each other before. And it was one of those pieces you had to write very quickly, hence the thoughtlessness I was talking about above can lead to trouble. And my take on it, you have to sort of come up with a take, was that Agnew in his mid-50s, who kept talking to this young pop star and saying, oh, come and see Shane Warne. I introduced you to Shane Warne later on. I thought, it's getting a bit dodgy here. It's a bit, you know, you can either be a sort of benevolent uncle or that panting, desperate 50-year-old man sort of looking a bit panting on the edge of the dance floor. And I wrote stupidly, and Aggers came down very much on the pervy side of the line. No, I don't think I even put very much. I just put on the pervy side of the line and thought nothing more of it. And then the next morning, the phone rings and said, Agnew here, ring me immediately. So I rang him up. He said, my parents are upset, my children are upset, my followers are upset, you've called me a pervert. And I said, no, I didn't really call you a pervert, I called you pervy. It was a more sort of Benny Hill type thing, you know, dee-dee-diddly-dee-dee-dee. That's what I thought pervy meant. I'm probably on fairly weak ground there. He goes, oh, well, this is appalling. And then I could hear him turning on a tape recorder, which I didn't think journalists should do to journalists. And he goes, you know, I need an apology, otherwise, apologise immediately. And I said, well, no, you know, I'm quite happy to apologise to you. It was never my intention to upset you or your family or anything like that. And he goes, oh, I need an apology. If you don't apologise within 24 hours, you've got hell to pay. So I thought no more of it. And then I thought he just, you know, had a long night. But England had just won the Ashes, so there were more important things to talk about. And then a friend rings up and says, you should get on. Will, have you had a look at Twitter? This is 11 o'clock at night. And I didn't even really know what Twitter was. I knew Luddites, fair point. I said, no. He said, well, you should go on there because Aggers has launched his army against you. And indeed, I got on Twitter and put my name in. And it was like this slightly alarming few hours, because every time you just all these people, he had 20,000 followers then, but God, he's probably got 200,000 now. But of course, he had said, this journalist has called me a pervert. Boom. And then a link to a piece where I hadn't called him a pervert, I called him pervy, but no one reads the link, do they? So it doesn't matter. So it was all this, Will Buckley should be fired, Will Buckley should, what a language, kill him, murder, blah, blah, blah. It's just ridiculous, because everyone had to top each other. And there were a few interesting ones. Met Buckley once, a cold fish. I still want to know, I was desperate to find out who that was. No. I don't think so. I have slightly blurred memories. You don't sort of store them all up. Because every time I got to the bottom of the screen, they had to go, there were 57 more entries. And you go, oh. So you just gone sort of... And then Lily Allen weighed in, and the Telegraph had a headline saying, Lily Allen supports Aggers over pervert slur. And the whole thing was ridiculous, but for sort of 48 hours, slightly... disorientating and disarming. The newspaper quite liked it because it was getting more traffic for them, and so, and then boom, it went as quickly as it had gone. And I don't know. I just sort of end with that story. One, to see that Twitter and these followings and this way of, whereas journalism should be about pricking the powerful and pricking upwards, it's a tool that can be used in a sort of bullying. This whole I'm slightly nervous of things like followers, which suggest like disciples and all that, and people, whatever. There is that lurking problem with it. And also, everything's become so ephemeral, so evanescent. It's sort of there and gone. And I just sometimes worry for people who want to spend 2-3 weeks maybe crafting a piece, which, who knows, might be more worthwhile to read. Anyhow. Those reminiscences from the last millennium, almost. If there are any questions, I don't know how I can help, but... Is there a way back? That's what I was going to ask you lot.
Have you got a solution? Have you got, for your, the long form journalism? Is there a way, to get back to?
I think at the moment, two things. It's going to become vocational. I think it'll be something people do because they generally enjoy it, like writing poetry or novels which are unlikely to get a big audience, or it's going to rely on patronage and philanthropy. That there may be I think there must be a possibility that for a brand to commission a journalism competition or have 10 pieces of 10,000 words and send it out once a year and you pay a pound for it. I don't know. I mean, something like that. But possibly at the moment it doesn't seem to be because everything's got smaller. And if it's now everyone's reading on their mobile, it's even harder to write. I can't imagine reading a 10,000 word piece on a mobile. But I wish I could be. But maybe some genius will come up with a way of making money out of it.
Any more questions?
Do you think people generally wouldn't read longer articles anyway now that they've got to the point where they're used to just reading little snippets because they're all busy and they're just being distracted all the time?
Possibly, but I sort of being counterintuitive, all these things always going one way and another. I think that maybe they might find that their brains are being so bombarded by all these small bits of information that they might take refuge in a longer piece that will require them to think more and maybe they'll feel they'll learn more from. I don't know. There's longform.org, I don't know, which is a website I go to a lot, but I'm still so Luddite, I then print it off and read them.
It's losing that skill to be able to do that is younger people coming up through are so used to the 140 characters or whatever is being able to read long form journalism.
Well, perhaps, but which is slightly worrying.
Information is a skill that's being gradually, just
Certainly with my teenage children, you sort of watch them and there'll be 3 or 4 sort of screens, and they are incredibly adept, very quick typing and all this because you have to be to. But they must. I mean, what happens at colleges? Are they? I don't know.
I think there's a big danger in the words everyone and saying
Yeah.
everyone's reading on mobiles and everybody's
Yeah.
using Twitter and certainly to my mind, I'm not a Luddite. I'm very happy to tweet and I use Twitter for particular purposes. Other times I also read something because I want information out of it. It's just another layer on top. And you can imagine a couple of centuries ago people saying, well, I don't know, if we give up cartridge into pieces of tablets of stone, then aren't we going to lose the skills to do that? And actually, as human beings, we've got some very innate things that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Communicating is one of them. We did it sort of sitting around campfires outside caves, and we still do it now. And our tools may seem to be more and more advanced, but actually they aren't really. The process is just the same. And each time we go through a different phase and something gets added and something drops off. So the most cumbersome technologies drop off
Mhm.
at the bottom end, and the most kind of nimble ones sort of start to get more popular, and then it balances out because people will adjust to using things like Twitter and the internet and social networking and all of those. So they'll take their place in amongst all the things that we always do, which is write. People write in long form, and the way of producing it changes
Mhm.
as we go on. And
Uh,
as you say, people will write novels. They'll write articles, they'll write thoughtful pieces, and people do read them because they sometimes do need something more than a little kind of snack.
I mean, I hope you're right, and I hope it does go in a cycle. I do think that the current technologies don't help storytelling. If we went back, whereas sitting in a cave probably does, because you've got sort of nothing else to do. And I do, if the more time people spend online and communicate just through text, I do think that creates quite an atomized society. I do think it's quite hard to tell a joke if you don't hear someone laugh. It's to get ha-ha back or a little smile. I always think ha-ha is ironic anyhow, but then maybe that's just more about me than the sender. And I can't quite see how these current technologies are going to encourage storytelling because it's not.
I think you've got a perspective because you had
Yeah, I'm it. Yeah.
you had a big audience for reading your
Mhm.
Whereas most people who haven't become a journalist will, you know, so I might think something, but I think, well, there's no point in me writing that down because nobody's ever going to get to read it. However, if I have a blog, I might get 20 people read it or 100 people. So in that sense, it's been very liberating.
Yeah, no,
For
absolutely.
a lot of people. I can see that if you earn your living professionally out of it, it seems like a backward step.
But
But for many people, actually, they can express more.
and as you say,
Get more read.
and I think far better to have 200 people reading your stuff carefully and enjoying it than 20,000 people following a tweet you might have done.
Yeah.
And I think that's a positive.
We've got another question over there. Maybe it was from the top. Yeah.
Just to address that gentleman's concerns about sort of the younger generation and the loss of skill, I know many people at UEA, for example, who are highly talented essayists. However, they do live in the environment of tweeting and texting and Facebook. So what that makes them is expert at identifying opportunities where long-form journalism is actually instantly applicable. They're really good at identifying, who wants to read it and when and why. Because they are so used to being immersed in both environments, meeting the requirements of their traditional university courses alongside, Twitter updates and just sharing information with their friends. So
Oh yeah, no, I'm very well. I'm very well endowed. I am a university lecturer. I work at Newer and University of Coventry as well. And and I have plenty of young people that are very, very adept at. But I do notice some sort of just being able to read the first 10 hits of a Google page, or or just being able to read Wikipedia, or I'm sure it's no different from the past as well. There would be that type of student.
And undoubtedly, that recommendation service that Twitter offers so well is a boon.
Just to note about how people get information these days. I've had researchers, I work in the world of TV, etc., which may be Luddite as well these days. But where researchers come from universities, they've got first from Cambridge or wherever, but sometimes you have to tell them, get on the phone to someone. They actually won't go on the phone, they're actually always relying too much on certain social media things. And it's brilliant, it's great stuff, it's fantastic. This information's so available now, that's the problem, that it's almost not filtered correctly. They won't get on the phone and talk to a person. Someone arrives actually to be interviewed and they can barely speak because they haven't talked to them.
Well, I mean, I'm going to agree with you, obviously, because what happened, one of the changes in journalism, which used to be about going out of the office and getting a story, that was what a journalist did, is now it's all become about being in the office and processing information. So it doesn't need any. You're not interviewing people, you're not trying to find out a story, you're getting all this information on the whole and saying, well, that source tends to be reliable. But at no stage have you questioned that information, other than saying that it seems that they're in Tehran where they're blogging, boom, let's go with it. It's a good, and I think that unquestioning side is also not very good for journalists who should be deeply cynical and questioning everything.
It's not
That,
journalism.
Or it's not journalism, yeah.
We've got another question over there.
I really agree. What I see at the moment is that we're in what is called the third industrial revolution. So we had steam that came communication, then we had electricity, and now we have technology. So we are all communicating completely differently.
Mhm.
So is it not the case then that perhaps we need to look at jobs differently and start looking at how we will not be replaced by technology? So looking for jobs, that
Yes.
the journalist job isn't as it used to be.
No, yeah.
It's completely different now. So perhaps, jobs now that we go for, we have to look at it very, very sort of like how do we exist in this world and how do we not be replaced by technology?
Absolutely. I mean, at the moment, as I said, it's journalists and porn stars, but who knows which professional trade or craft, or whatever you call those jobs, will be hit next. Lawyers, estate agents, PR, all under threat.
Question for Richard.
I think when you're saying about the long form stuff, I think you probably find that a lot of people here read some websites where there are bizarre long form. I really like Wired, for example, and after through 4 pages of content, a long article
Yeah.
in the paper, because I value the content and it's interesting. Whereas a lot of stuff you just take as a snippet. I think
Yeah.
People buy singles, people buy albums. I think, you know, as music exists still in that form, I think writing will continue. And it's the same with video as well. You can see a lot of bloggers on YouTube. Some of them will do kind of the really short snippet, just bits the cameras. But others will really kind of curate their content as well and really care about it. And for channels like Vice on YouTube,
Of course.
they're sending out journalists who are producing 20 minutes quality piece of film about something which you never normally watch or hear about, and it's worth the time when people watch it.
And Vice is a very good example. It started as a magazine, as you know, but it started by them giving it out free to the 20,000 biggest opinion for trendiest people they thought in New York, London and Berlin. And I'm sure, I hope someone will come up with whether it's small micropayments or a subscription device. If, let's say, Wired said it will cost you $6.99 a year,
Which they've talked about doing, making some of their video channels subscription based.
you probably pay that.
Yeah, you would, yeah. If you for a year, you wouldn't kind of think about it really.
And at a stroke, it probably, that then means that people might become profitable. Not with your £2, but if you were one of 100,000 people, that's quite significant. Yeah, I don't need to be so doom and gloom. Thank you, you've cheered me up.